This is the first of 4 sessions on job search prep that I do every year, have for a while. So this is on resumes. The next one, which I think is next week already, is on cover letter writing. You might be inclined to think that one's dispensable. I would say, as I just said in my class, 8:40 this morning, it might be more important than this one. And yes, you're going to do a cover letter even if you're not asked to. Okay, that's kind of the make or break, separating the wheat from the chaff, so to speak, in application reviewing at this point. So that's important. I would try to make that. And then the other 2 are job interviewing and negotiation. The job interviewing, thinking about how you prep for that and how you want to conduct yourself. And then the negotiation piece, again, you might think, oh gosh, wouldn't that be a nice problem to have, and I won't even be negotiating. I would encourage you to go to that. Folks that take 840 this term, well, I'm sorry, 840 any time at this point are exposed to that, but even if you've had it already, it's a good reminder, refresher. You can ask questions that are specifically salient to your current job search. And as I try to pitch this when I teach it, it's important as a skill for being a good advocate in any job you have on behalf of the organization, but it's also one of the only darn thing at this point that's going to help us reduce that gender pay gap. It appears that beyond structural biases or discrimination, women's lack of negotiation and the lack of ability at negotiating when they try appears to be highly correlated with the pay gap. So we've got to dig in and deal with this. Okay, so that's why I doggedly teach this whenever I can. Okay, so that's the primer. So here's how this will work today. I have the materials that you have before you. You have it upstairs? Okay. Are a couple of resumes. Let's review. Yeah, so it's a couple resumes. So I have one resume pulled. Do you have any extras? No. There are 30 total, so it should be enough. So the top one, grabbed off the internet, admittedly. A good example of the kind of helpful, somewhat questionable resources you can find on the internet. That's kind of why I deliberately included it. And then you have a second resume from a student from years ago where we went through some phases together trying to change it. So through the course of reviewing these, I hope to make some general points and take your questions. So don't hold the questions off. This is a workshop more than a seminar, certainly not a lecture. So get your questions in as we go, by all means. Okay? Any questions already? Okay. So the other thing to say is you will hear different opinions about things. You might even hear different opinions at our wonderful career services. Reading online, you'll hear different things. This is ultimately your document, and the process of this, of putting your materials together on paper, is more art than science. So what that means, unfortunately, is you have to be the ultimate arbiter of what you're comfortable with as a document. And you have to make some decisions across a range of advice. And of course, the parents and other kin and friends will also add their advice about things that you should do. And you're going to have to make some decisions. I will present what I think are pretty well agreed upon opinions. So you can put those into your hopper and then decide accordingly. But again, they're also, some of this is stylistic, and you'll need to make some decisions about the style that you prefer. Okay, so let's dig in. So we have Kelly Trevina and her resume. And we're just going to walk through top to bottom how this works, okay? So the first thing first, no objective. Let's think about what the objective, why do you have an objective in the first place, right? It's to let the employer know what kind of job you want to apply for, right? Okay, well, in the act of submitting the resume to a job position, I think you've made it clear what job you want to apply for. So it's a little redundant. The other work that this might do in terms of additional verbiage that you're supplying is the work that the cover letter should provide. So ultimately, what the objective in the resume does are a bunch of problems. They delay reading the actual substance. They sound wordy, and potentially they're incorrect. You add wording that in fact pulls away from what the job is that you're applying to. You can actually make it worse for yourself to be considered a fit for a position through this. You're not going to make it better. The simple act of applying to the job secures that you're applying to that job. But all the wording, I more often than not, when I read objectives, I'm concerned that in fact the description that the person's providing is not a good fit with the job they're applying to. Okay, so we'll get rid of that, right? Go get right into the substance. And this is the time, again, art, not science. You need to decide your style. But I would argue strongly that with really across the whole process, until you're hired, until you've done all 4 of these sessions, all 4 of the processes they reflect, this is not the time for individuality and creativity and showing your beautiful, unique, alternative, countercultural other self. The time for that is after you have the job, admittedly. Now, it doesn't mean selling out and doing things or saying things that you feel uncomfortable with. But in this case, there really is little to recommend not sticking to the established order and the established format for doing these. Okay, so let me walk through what those are, and you guys can push back as we go. The first thing is education tends to come first. Unless you have an extensive career prior to going into social work, things like thematic ordering of job skills or phases of your career are premature and ill-fitted for most of the jobs you'll be applying for. So you start with education at the top, and then you're going to go into your kind of a couple categories of job experience, right? Let's look at what's in this person's education section. So they have the bachelor, they have their high school diploma. No, we're starting with college and going up from there, okay? They also have their scholarships and awards in this section and professional development and certificates. So that is really good content, but it is not content that's appropriate to the education section, I would argue. That goes in a back-end section, which depending upon what goes with it, will be called different things. Honors and skills, or grants, experience. We'll get to that section in a little bit, but so you may word it depending upon the combination of things you put in there. Maybe you have some publications, you've had extensive trainings that were multi-day, you've had certifications, you have language abilities. So whatever that chunk of extras is that doesn't fit into a job title or responsibility, you can cluster at the back end. Okay, but the education section is for the degree granting experiences. Okay, so even study abroad. So it occurred within a degree granting program, but that should be pulled out and go to the back end as well. Is that clear with folks? Make sense?
So even like things like Dean's List or things like that, you would not.
That's a great question, because that actually is a little distinct. That I would say you can put underneath a degree listing. You can list your major and your minor, or your course emphases if you want. You can put your GPA in if you want. I'll talk about that in a minute. And then you can put Dean's List and then the different semesters. So the things with like Dean's List and GPA. Now, let me stress, it's not about the grades. You're more than your grades, right? But if you're going to put your grades in, they kind of need to be pretty rockin', and all of the degrees you report have to have GPAs, and those GPAs all have to be equally rockin', right? So you can't, if you put the MSW GPA, well, you don't have the final one yet, and then your bachelor's, and you don't put the bachelor's in, this is a red flag that the bachelor's must have been horrific, right? Because you didn't put it in there. If you put both in and one is fairly low, that doesn't help much. So it's no problem eliminating it if it's not a particular strength. By strength, I probably mean 3.6 or higher. Again, that's art, not science, not a fixed rule, but give or take. Okay. Yeah, Dean's List, if it's like one term only, maybe don't need to put it in there. But if it was like extensive Dean's List representation, then you could put that in there.
List that, like if you made it like all semester, like how would you?
Dean's List all semesters, or Dean's List, try to bracket the years, like start.
6 times recipient.
Yeah, six out of X out of Y terms. X out of Y semesters.
Yeah. What about like magna cum laude?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, so those things that comment on the nature of your success, that characterize the nature of success in that program, that works. But experiences like the studies abroad, that kind of thing, should go into the kind of experiences section of that. Okay.
So if you, sorry, I'm just thinking about the studies.
Whoa, I'm sorry, I didn't realize you were all back here.
Okay.
Whoa.
You're projecting enough that we can hear you. Just a second. So for the study abroad thing, you would list like the school that you studied. I'm just thinking like.
Well, you could, but in the back section.
Okay.
Yeah, you could definitely do all that detail. You should, but that goes at the back.
Gotcha.
Yeah, you want to really just have a fairly tight, clean listing of the educational degrees up front. Okay. Now I'm gonna feel like I have to like spin the entire time. Okay.
Would you have like an associate's degree in liberal arts?
Sure. Absolutely. You could do associates and then, bachelor's and then on up. Yeah. Okay. That sound good? All right. Skills profile. Again, someone who has a really long career under their belts maybe could put this in. I would say this is the job of the cover letter, right? That you don't need to spend time on this, that this defers the getting into the substance. Okay. And so it's not ideal for here. Some of the things you could put in at their concrete, specific experiences, qualifications, again, in that back section, all right? Okay, how are we doing? Good? Okay, so now let's turn to page 2 of Kelly Trevina. So work experience. For most of you guys, I generally tend to suggest 2 sections. One is, and let me say, this is to navigate the complexity of your professional internships that are not paid and not officially employment, but nonetheless are professional experience. So I would suggest something along the lines of professional experience as the first labeled employment or experience section. And then the second one being something along the lines of other related experience. And those are suggested terms. That's not, again, art, not science, what you're comfortable with. But into the professional experience section, I would most certainly put your internships. And if you need to, so you'll have to come up with some kind of title, so graduate intern, social work intern. Some of the organizations actually give you some sort of a specific title, especially if they have multiple interns in different departments. So you'll list those. You'll list, and then in terms of what qualifies as job-like, right? In general, across either section, I would say it is shorter term but heavy hour experiences, or longer term but somewhat lighter hour experiences. Okay, but I would say if you're getting down to 5 hours or less a week, regardless of the length of time, that probably slides into that catch-all section at the back end that we'll talk about, okay? So heavy hour, even if it's only for, a limited time, a few months, or lighter hour, but long-term, okay? And then you basically are going to categorize that as professional, but into professional I'd put, so anything social work related, okay, social welfare related, human services, and potentially with professional, non-social work related, but professional. So managerial in nature, right? Working in retail or other service, but that is above the kind of frontline work. That's managerial, that's involving training others, that's involving program creation, this kind of thing. I would consider putting into that section. Again, it's subjective, right? There's no right or wrong exactly, but that to me makes sense. Into the other related, I would absolutely put in like any work you're doing to get yourself through school, unless it's, again, really short hour, really limited time, and then you might maybe stick it in the back end or else just skip it. But a lot of you have these other jobs that are putting yourself through, or in high school even, or you have from high school onward, or multi-year, or you move from, being a wait staff to being a supervisor in a restaurant setting. I would totally put that in. Students ask me that all the time. Yes?
How far back do you go? Like, I'm thinking, I had several different jobs during undergrad, but I've had several different jobs since.
Yeah.
Like, how far,
So there the standard would be, the further back you go, it should be weighty. Like, you have higher threshold of what that is. So if it was pretty, so weighty, like it's extremely human services relevant, or it's a lot of hours or a lot of time, then definitely stick it in there. Or alternately, it's kind of a saturation issue. If you worked all through college, like there were no gaps, the whole time it was fairly like 10 hours or more a week, that shows, right, work ethic, diligence. So you could try putting that in there as well, right? Otherwise, you're a little more selective with the older stuff, and then putting in the more recent stuff because you want to show whatever experience is more recent, kind of regardless of how weighty it might be, right? Yeah.
So under the professional, you'd put
not necessarily internship, but like volunteer work, two things social work related?
So that's true. That's a good point. So internship, because they are professionally kind of structured, you have a performance evaluation. I feel very comfortable saying that those are professional experiences, and you want to like label them through the title as an internship. With volunteering, I would put in there, if it were, again, pretty substantial hours and time duration.
Like I volunteered for like CASA for a year. And then
Yeah.
we did like trainings and like something.
So again, it's a subjective thing. I probably would lean toward that going in the back section, I would say. Like how many hours a week would you say, for how long? Or was it a year, you said? But
I was like 6 hours.
yeah, I'd probably put that in the back section. I would think about doing that. Yeah.
So how would you put in like promotions? And if there's been like multiple positions, how much of a description would you put under each one if they really differ?
Right. So there's a formatting consideration with that too. If you've had multiple positions in the same organization, even if it's lateral, but certainly if it's vertical, so you've been promoted, wow, that is awesome. You completely want to capture that. But the catch is, so if you see the formatting, the typical formatting is that you go job title first, and then you list organization, city, state, right? And then the dates. If you have a situation, even if one time you had multiple positions you want to report for the same organization, then the whole thing has to flip where you go organization first and then job title, where you'll do job title after, or actually what you can do is the organization at the top and then job title underneath in bold. And what you could do if you have two or more titles in the same organization is do then those different titles and their descriptions underneath, perhaps indented a little bit, so that you can kind of visually see it's within the same organization.
And then just put the different dates like that you get.
Exactly. So then after that, so in line with the job title, you'll list the dates, and then you'll have the bullet points. Okay. Now let's get, yeah.
And do you recommend going more by position rather than organization if that's not an issue?
Yeah, the standard would be position first, then the rest. Yeah, if you don't have the multiple titles in the same organization. Yeah. Let's talk about formatting for a minute now in terms of the structure of the descriptive information. First off, margins. Let's talk, people. Margins. And students, I will tell them this in sessions, and then I do very nicely occasionally weigh in on feedback on resumes. Was it you that asked? And I didn't get to it. Oh my goodness. I am happy to look. I can't always promise that I have the time to get back by certain deadlines. And I will tell you the minimum size margin, and you will still send me things that violate those minimums. 0.9. 0.9. I won't make you do an inch, but 0.9 inches. Right? Let's think about this, right? You have people that are receiving resumes for jobs. They're probably getting 300 if the job is anything decent, right? And they are like me, who's phasing into probably needing progressive lenses like the bifocals, but has refused. And so like I have to do this all the time, and I'm very fussy about it. And I get the little tiny print, and it's all smushed together, and it's the teeny margins, and it makes me very fussy, right? And I'm not even the one that's handling the constant barrage of resumes. So 0.9 is, but seriously, the smallest you should go. In terms of text, 11. And 11 with responsible font, because we all know there are fonts like Helvetica Narrow, that are really like 8, but they tell you it's 11? No. So 11-point fonts, 0.9 margins. Yeah.
So 0.9, is that top, bottom?
That's the whole ball wax, all the way around. Exactly. You can have the header that you put in, like right here, this could be tucked up within that 0.9. That's okay, right? But the basic space here needs to be 0.9. Right, and you can hug up the in-between white space. So potentially, like to avoid cutting in the middle of a listing, you can snug the space. You want it to be consistent though, so if you're going to snug it one place, you've got to snug it the whole way, because even though a person's not going to say, most people, oh, it's 8, it's 8 fonts, no, 8, whatever, here, and it's only, it's 10 here, it's irregular. They're not going to say that, but it will look a little disheveled after a while. You can sense that it's not even. So, okay, and then you want to do some things like, consistency in general, whatever style you pick, you want it to be meticulously the same all the way through. Otherwise, what does it give the impression of? You're not good with details. You're not good with being concerned about first impressions. It sounds very silly and trivial, but until they know who you are, they have nothing else to go on. So there's just absolutely no room for error, okay? So I would say, bolding the title, and then, a comma, or whatever structure you use, but with the organization's name, the city and the state. State can be abbreviated in the two-letter abbreviation. You can have the date right next to it, or more common is to have it offset, where it's kind of right flush. That is one exception to the margin rule. It can be hard in many cases, especially if you spell out the month, which looks a little bit nicer than the abbreviation. By the time you fill in the information on the job title and the organization, it can be hard to fit the dates. So you can select the date alone and scoot the margin into that 0.9 range. That's okay to have it be a little smaller. That's the one little violation area you can engage in, okay? But you want to have that all consistent so that the dates are all lined up in the same way across the right side if you do that. Doing okay there, back there, guys? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Hi, peanut gallery. Okay. Okay, what else? The bullets. So you do see narratives, like paragraphs. If there are 300 of these coming in, nobody wants to read even one paragraph, let alone many. And it could be a nice creative way of describing what you've done, but it's not efficient, and you gotta be loyal to the efficiency imperative here, right? So you do bullets. You have to have at least 3. I would suggest no more than 5, right? Because getting into the 6 more range, that's kind of like VP CEO land there. You should be able to encapsulate most of the main job responsibilities in that 3 to 5 range. 2 looks a little too short. If you only have 2, like I really only have 2 on it, then actually that might be a case of that position needing to be in the back end listing. If you didn't have enough going on, then it probably should be pulled out. Okay, so 3 to 5. It's not in chronological order. Now you're really trying to do the most heavy hitting downward, like most important stuff. And you're not padding, you're not exaggerating, but you're being very intentional about the verbs that you use, starting with a verb, an action verb, right? So not helped, but co-developed, co-created, evaluated, implemented, planned, assessed, right? Think about what were the primary tasks, the responsibilities, and try to nail the verb that conveys that, and thus then really informationally clarifies what you did.
You said it doesn't have to be in chronological order?
No. This is about, this is and here again, this is pesky to say, but the reason you may have multiple versions of the resume is if you're applying to different jobs and those jobs differ somewhat in responsibilities, you may strategically adjust, like highlight certain responsibilities over others in your experience. Again, this is not lying. You're just simply, you've done a range of things. So you could even have a superset resume that violates the 5 bullet point rule and has a whole bunch of bullet points, and you keep that one whole, and then for every job you apply to, you do a save as, and then you sit there and you kind of customize the bullet point listings to best fit the position you're applying to. So you could do that in all your spare time, right? There was a hand.
If you do past tense, do you have to stick with past tense, like even if you're in something presently?
Yeah, that's a great point. Great question. So past tense if it's gone, and if it's still going on, no. So if it's current responsibility, present tense, if it's, the trick would be if you have some things that you've gotten done that you don't do anymore. So then you'd say, past tense, and maybe even then stick in a separate date window for if you're using past tense for a current job, just to note that you formally, if it's a big event, like a conference or whatever. So, yeah. Other questions now? How are you doing? Okay. What else here? Oh, for summer positions, right? So, summer, 2006, and 2007, something like that. You don't have to put I wouldn't bother with especially if it's multiple summers, right? Then it's really complicated to do June to August this year, to just go by kind of seasonal abbreviations. Okay, so here's the back end section for this one, memberships and activities. So again, you might have, what all do you guys have? You have, language skills, certifications, trainings. What else? What are you missing? Other kinds of categories of extra stuff you have. Anybody? Honors, right? Recognition, service. That's if you have extra the CASA, if you want to put certain things in the back end, you could put, rather than volunteering, you could put service. That's a nice, different kind of framing to that. Yeah.
What about board member?
I would put that as service or community involvements, So you'll fashion a title for your individual section of this that's going to be, unique to what's in that section, right? So all of your different sections are going to be variable, right? What was I going to say about that?
So this is more of a skills-based resume, right? Versus like a work experience-based resume.
Well, this has work experience on it too. It just the category that's in page 2. So you have a skills profile, which I would cut the entire thing, and then she has one section that's a work experience, getting down to brass tacks. And so with the work experience, I would say, frankly, that in Kelly Trevina's resume, there's only 4 listings. If you only have 4, don't sweat it. I would put some into professional experience, like the first one, the volunteer and community program coordinator. This is page 2 of the handout. Educational assistant, that's a volunteer. So you have to decide if you think that's meaty enough to go into this section. Work experience coordinator, so that I would all count as professional. And then sales clerk, I'd put in other related experience. Okay. Now, if you only have 1 to put in a given section, then you might want to just go with a single section like this, like, professional and other work experience combined, rather than 2 sections. If you just have 1 listing, you probably need a 2 or more to make an individual section go. Okay? Yes?
Is it ever appropriate or necessary for more like a long-term volunteer experience to put in hours that you worked?
I think that can be helpful, yeah, especially if you label it as volunteer, then indicating its heftiness or the duration, the intensity by listing the hours, I think would be not a bad idea.
That'd be appropriate just underneath.
Yeah. Good question. Okay, so here also, so this person has individually sub-labeled this section. That I say isn't necessary. This section largely is chronological, with the exception that language skill is obviously not, I knew Spanish last year, but I forgot it all this year. That doesn't make sense. So like things that are time a-specific, I might, did you forget all your Spanish already?
It goes fast.
It does, I can relate. But so does everything else too, the brain, So that I would say you could put that at the top or the bottom, like things that again are not time specific. Otherwise, make the section chronological. And so ideally, you're going to frame it not actually as she's done it. You're going to fashion some sort of a title, right? Invited speaker, member, trainee, attendee, invited presenter, right? This kind of thing, right? A study abroad student. Right, that kind of thing. So you're going to fashion some sort of a title, highlight that, do the bullet points, and then comma, organization, comma, city, comma, state, and then without having to set it off, frankly, just in line with the flow of the sentence, then put the beginning and end times, like month, year, okay? Honors, potentially like awards, grants, other kinds of honors also go in here as well, okay? So don't need to subtitle those. What else? Oh, yes.
So I noticed in like all of the volunteer activities and all of that, there's no like descriptions of what they did.
Right.
So would you?
In this section, because it didn't meet the threshold of being in the experience employment section, you don't go into detail like that. You could at most, if the title of the organization is really it gives no sense of what it is, you could, in parentheses, very, very briefly, like use a phrase to describe the nature of the organization, right? But between that and the quick, like, pseudo title that you devise for it, that should be enough. This is not the place to go into detail. So if you feel like, oh no, but it was so much more than that, then potentially it's a candidate for the front section, or one of the front sections. So you have to decide where you feel it's appropriate to put that, okay?
So, I mean, I've worked more in the healthcare setting, and they use a lot of documentations, like programs like CPRS, AOD, things like that.
Yes.
Do you put that on, and would it go in this back section?
Yes. So it's interesting having started doing these kinds of seminars when I was on faculty at Washington, so in Seattle, right, .com land. It came rapidly that those kinds of software programs, that expertise, that's gold. Absolutely put that on there. What you are not allowed to put on is anything that came with the purchase of your computer. Don't put on any Microsoft Word, Suite, Office, Excel, what else? PowerPoint? Oh, no, okay? But seriously, that does not go on there, because we all know how to do that, all right? You're trying to be above and beyond. So common applications, common software, you don't put on. But anything, yes, that you've learned through the course of whatever experience you've had, absolutely, it would be wonderful to put on, okay? And then people occasionally try to humanize, personalize their resumes by adding certain hobbies and things. And I would say if you have some really intensive hobby, certainly where you've had recognition or it's competitive or this kind of thing, you could put it on there, but make sure that it's very brief. Okay, that you don't go on too long about it. Okay, it's like one bullet summarizing all of that. Okay, I can't tell if there's concern on faces, or are you're concerned in particular. Are you okay? This is on videotape now. Aren't we happy about this? Okay. Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so minors here are certificates, technically?
Yeah.
So do you put that in the back? I know earlier you said like certifications,
So that would be in the category in my mind of a major minor kind of thing. And so that I would say put on education. What I typically recommend, and it might come up the next, there we go. Kind of it does. Yeah. What you can do is under education, under the degree, I would say do an indentation. So underneath the degree listing, where you could put, and maybe in italics to set it off a little bit, major, colon, whatever, and then next, underneath that also indented minor, colon, or concentration, or course emphases in da-da-da. So you have, as long as you're being reasonable and true to, true to experience and reason, like what your coursework was, you have some leeway in terms of how you characterize that. Yeah, so that's good to put up there. Okay, so let me go on to a real live resume.
Is it?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah.
To distinguish between paid and unpaid internships.
I would say. So I don't feel strongly about that. Now, there probably are other folks out there who do. I would say with the MSW professional internships, where you're noting that it's an internship and it's during your graduate studies, that speaks for itself, whether it's paid or stipended or not, as being professional level. Beyond that, you can indicate, so per Francesca's question, right, about the pay or the hours, right? You could note, volunteer in the number of hours, or just the number of hours. Again, I feel like the combination of the description of the responsibilities and tasks and the duration of time is enough to convey the salient information. I don't know that pay is particularly salient in that case, but this is your document. You should feel comfortable with it. So if you want to put that information in, it's certainly reasonable. I'm just not sure, either way that it's critical. So, okay. Yeah.
Do you still go on a 2-page maximum rule?
Oh gosh, thank you for saying that, Stacy. So there are even folks out there, believe it or not, who think that they're still on the 1-page maximum rule. Anyone of you want to out yourselves here as the 1-pager? Okay, 1 page was high school, possibly the beginning of undergrad. Right? Am I squishing this? Okay. I would say, there are probably quite a few of you that may need 3 pages. Some of you might even need 4. As long as you're sticking with the 0.9 margins, the 11-point font. By the way, the headers can be like 12. Like you can, ideally, you make those a little bigger to stand out. But as long as you stick with those, and the spaces in between aren't ridiculous. Like, you're not down to 0.5, but you're not up, at 14. Like it's so that basically when you look at the document, it's reasonable in terms of the allocation of print to white space, and it goes into 3. That's totally okay. 4, it is what it is, right? So as long as you vet it and it doesn't seem puffy or padded, right? It gets the information across distinctly but thoroughly, then it is what it is. Yeah, that's my response, right? Because many of you have had a range, including of the non-human services work experiences. I would encourage you to put those on there. They belong there. They're part of your experience. And the responsibilities and skills that were developed there are entirely salient in many cases to human services work. So that being the case, a lot of you, in my experience, are working a ton in those kinds of positions as well as the human services ones, and they should be captured. So, yeah, no artificial limits. Okay. Yes.
Do you think employers look down when they see that you have gaps in work experience, like a year off or whatever?
Oh. So it's tricky. I mean, I'd be lying if I suggested they don't care at all. But I know that they're getting used to seeing that in this economy, dragging on as it has, being pretty bad with high unemployment rates. So you're in good company in terms of resumes that have those. In many cases, so a school-based gap is not a gap, right? If you were studying, if you were dependent caregiving, if you were having some, overseas or other kinds of intensive or community experience, those aren't gaps, right? You could find a way to capture those in your resume and then talk about them. And if they're salient to the job, wrap them into your cover letter even. So beyond that, then, so that's a job interview question. You'll want to figure out a way to talk about it. But I think for most of you, it's not a gap per se. Do you have an exception to that, or?
No, I was just wondering.
Okay, yeah. Because right at school isn't a gap. School is school. You're doing something for sure. We're making sure that as your professors. Okay, so this was a before the first resume. So my initial feeling about this, the margins are reasonable. The fonts lack sex appeal. I'll just put that out there. I would say I'm a fan, and I always forget the term. There are fonts that have the little, like,
Serif versus sans serif.
Thank you. Yeah, so which one is this one?
Sans serif.
It doesn't have the little X. I mean, it's not kind of pointy or angular, right? Like Palatino, Times New Roman, which is also really boring. Don't do Times New Roman, that's very boring. Palatino, or is it Cambria? Is that one? I think I love Cambria. Century School Book, although some of those are really bad. Like they're really big, they take up way too much space. But those I think are crisper, although there can be some that go overboard. Anne's like, what are you talking about, right? What language is this?
I just really feel partial to Times New Roman.
Oh, it's just, see, maybe because it's an academic, that's more or less what you have to submit your articles in. I just find it so boring. Do people hear me? Do people feel me with that? The Times New Roman is so like last year. Yeah, so I think it's Cambria. Is it Cambria? Is there a Cambria? I find everyone's very excited about this. I can tell. I'm very fond of Cambria, and then what's the P one? Is it Palatino?
Yeah.
That one used to be popular. Now I don't see it as much.
What about Comic Sans?
Oh, Anne, be good now, really. But check though, because again, in that category, some are explode the size, right? Suddenly you're taking, and it's just way too big. But I think Cambria and Palatino they're attractive, but modest in terms of size demands, and not too ornamented. You don't want to go too crazy there. But this kind, I don't know why. I'm not telling you what to do thing. This is just literally Anna speaking about her personal preferences. But I find it a little plain. Right, and here I'm also finding that there is a lot of white space that I'm a little thoughtful about. Like I would have hugged up the space in between the listings within a given section at least. I also think with the education section, the degree is not sufficiently highlighted. You should start with that, and to potentially offset the school, the university school information. Okay. What else? Then you get into the experience, social work experience. That's a little limiting, because what if you're applying to a place that doesn't consider itself to be a social work organization? You actually might accidentally generate concern, like, oh, what's that mean? So versus professional experience, which is more inclusive, allows you to put in like managerial experience outside of human services, for example, you know. But a lot of, increasingly, we're working alongside all kinds of other professions. So to say social work job is a misnomer and actually a little confusing. So I wouldn't use social work as a term for your job experience. Okay. She puts in, information about pay, stipend, hours per week. You could do that. I don't feel strongly about it. Her dates are not offset. I don't find that to be a disaster, but I know some employers really want to see that. So they want to have it offset, flush right. And then affiliations, if you only have one of something, again, so one listing in a given employment section, one listing in the back end, then you shouldn't have a section. It needs to be at least 2 and ideally 3, kind of like the bullets, right? At least 3. I would say you could have more than 5 in this section, although you shouldn't have like 15. That would be a little imbalanced. Okay. Can we turn? So we're going to the after, right? And now this is 2 pages. Woo! But it's the same person. What happened? Okay, so she kept the font. We'll give her some slack. She changed. Oh, and you see you have the header here. Okay, you can create your own little stationery to show that you're really detail-oriented. And you use the same thing for your resume and your cover letter. Right, so make one that's kind of nice but not. Be careful wading into the Microsoft Word template section, because there's all kinds of crazy stuff, like big, giant, 20-point. Oh, sorry. Oh, God, I'm covering it. The templates can be really, wow, look out there. This is not the time to be out there. I want to be a little chill on that. So a little more conservative. Yes?
I actually went to an HR person and they told me that you should put, if you have a LinkedIn account, you should put your LinkedIn information. Do you know anything about that?
No, I think that's a great idea, actually. You could put that, you can put it at the top. Probably the top, yeah, I would say. And I would do, right, you want to do phone number, you want to do email. Please, please, please use your university email, right? You are paying in blood, sweat, tears, and lots of debt probably to get this degree, and that is institutional status, unavoidably, right? And it's also a more legitimate email account, right? So use your Wisconsin address. When you graduate, they do chop you off in access really quickly here, so get an alumni account and use that one. You can forward it to your email of preference, so Gmail or whatever, but please do take advantage of that institutional, kind of.
Can we use our alumni email right now on our resumes, or should we wait until after we graduate?
I'd wait, because using the Wisconsin one, again, shows that current, affiliation as an active member of the university, right? What else? Yeah, so LinkedIn, yeah, so you can put that in there. My sense is that LinkedIn is relatively well trafficked at this point. So create a LinkedIn account, make it look good. I don't have a sample one that I can give you. So there's mine, but it's very research. You can look at it. It's very research oriented. It looks like I'm an academic. Shocker. But where you want to kind of go through briefly, not too verbose. Different positions, work, the nature of your current studies, focus. Yeah. So put that in there if you've developed it. What else can we say? She has concentrations in here now. That's good. She's put the information about stipend and hours as a bullet, which I think works a little bit better. She does not offset the dates here, so she has it flowing. Again, that's okay. I don't feel super strongly. It might be nominally preferable to have the offset dates alongside the title of the job. But I don't feel.
Question. Yeah. So she for the first one, she put her stipend and her hours, but for the following internship, she doesn't put her hours.
They probably didn't get paid.
Yeah, I know she didn't get paid, but then she didn't put her hours. So what?
Oh, that's a good
When
question.
you want consistency in that?
Yes, we do want consistency in that. So that's the oversight. Yeah.
Which is why then you're not going to put hours in for your paid work. So as long as it's a graduate internship and those hours are kind of prescribed anyway, I'm not sure I feel strongly about you needing to put it in there. What else? So the other thing that's key to note is that as you're writing these up, in addition to being really thoughtful about the verb choice that accurately reflects the action and the level of responsibility in which you engaged in completing the given responsibility, you want to be really specific, like numbers of clients, numbers of trainings. If you facilitated a group, how many weeks, what kind of group? And when I say what kind, like a catchphrase, like a adolescent mental health group, right? So quick wording, but you want to be really specific, like how many months did the group meet? How many times a week? Did you co-facilitate it? Did you individually facilitate it? Did you plan it, develop it, plan it, and implement it? Did you evaluate it? Like thinking about all the levels of tasks engaged in a given project, right? But you want to be really specific, like, with clients, what age, how many of them, what were their diagnoses, or what was the nature of the services you provided to them. So this is it's a fundamental challenge, because it doesn't mean you can go on and on. You have to be really succinct and at the same time really descriptive. So when I review students' resumes, I look in every single case. I go through and I note the desire for more detail. Right, say more about this, right? Because the more you can provide here, right, the more the employer has to grab onto about, she's had this kind of experience. That's exactly what we need, right? And that will be combined with the work you do in the cover letter in summarizing and pulling out experience. But there are details that you can capture in here that you wouldn't necessarily put into the cover letter, but the combination allows you to show the match and the fit. Okay. How are we doing about questions?
For the reference part, it just says these references available upon request.
You guys are like plants today, perfect for mentioning things that I've forgotten to note, but that are important. So please, 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 please put this and only this on your resume. Here's the reason why. Now, the exception being when you have to submit a resume with an application form, often for public sector employment, where you can't submit the application without the references. This is different. But when you do that, of course, before hitting send or submit, you will have contacted all of the references, having already lined them up to be references. So that's the first step. Are you willing to be referenced for me for a job search? And then you're applying to a specific job. They require you to submit the references with the application, and before you hit send or submit, you have notified those agreeable references that you're going to be doing this. You're going to hit click, and so they might be emailed or phone called, right? Barring that, like where you're just sending in a resume and a cover letter, you put this information, and that's because, realistically, you're going to get a hit, so to speak, and be called up for an interview, a portion of the time that you send these out, right? You do not want to have your references information sent out all over creation to be randomly called, unbeknownst to you and without warning to them, right? It's very important that you engage in some really good care and feeding, so to speak, of your references. So how you ask them in the first place, and then how you work with them supportively and appreciatively through the course of a process that probably is going to go on for a while, like a little longer than you think, and involve a lot of applications, right? So you want to minimize how much they're bugged. I'm seeing the looks on the faces over here. And you want to be able to alert them. Like, so when you get a request for references, when you've gotten a hit, you provide them, you have like a separate document that's a single page with the references listed and who they are. Same little nice header on that, so all your stuff is connectable and it's clear who you are in the contact. So you list the references there, send those off. And as you do that, or before you do that, you email or phone call, whatever their preference is, all those references saying, I've just applied to this position, attach the position description or the link to it. And I've been asked to provide my references, so I am providing your name. And as we agreed, your email and or phone or whatever, right? Having asked them what they prefer, right? So it's possible that you'll receive a phone call or an email the next period of time. And you're doing that out of respect, so they have a heads up on the phone contact or the email contact, and so that they are in the best position to brag about you. Because if I get a cold call, and I haven't gotten the job information, I don't know when the person's applied, I'll do a general rave, but I can be way, way more convincing if I know the job, right? And better than that is in the communication with the student or graduate, I ask them, or if I've trained them well, they will tell me, here are the particular points of fit where I think I knocked it out of the ballpark. And then parentheses, and here are the areas that I'm kind of worried about. Right? So this helps me be a great reference by nailing the stuff that is a good fit, and then I might, whether solicited or not, if I think legitimately that I can speak to some things that they're a little worried about the employer's impression of, then I will do that as well. But I can't do that, right, if I get my stuff stuck on every resume and I get random phone calls or random emails. So you want to be respectful, but also tactical in helping your references be, you know, as great for you as they want to be. So yeah, so that's what you put on there. Okay. Other questions? How are we doing? No? That's the last page. Let's keep going. Questions? Yes.
Would you recommend doing if you had a recent name change to let people know?
Oh.
Like an old supervisor might leave as the old name.
Absolutely. Okay. Let me think, because I did a name change too. So under the resume, not under the resume, I would say even at the top, perhaps, you might somewhere, like under your name, yeah, so you have the name, by the way, but formatting thing again, in addition to the serif, whatever we're talking about here with the little, you know, font thing, I'm a huge fan of small caps, not a big fan of all caps. Do you know what small caps are? Right? The first letter's bigger, and then it's like smaller, but very nice. So I'm fond of small caps for things like the name at the top, and then the headers. I find small caps just, you know, puts it over the top a little bit nicely. Anyway, get to the job. No. Anyway, so possibly not at the bottom of this header thing, but underneath the name, you might say, spell out, not in small caps, like regular, formally, and then that name or the last name only, kind of experiment with how it looks. And then maybe even in the cover letter then, I would say somewhere in there, probably toward the end, I would just in parentheses note well, no, we think. Nope, not in the cover letter, in the reference page, because they won't be calling anybody if you don't give them the references on the resume. That's even further reason not to do that. When they ask for those on the reference page at the top, you can say, you know, folks with an asterisk, you know, before their listing knew me as so-and-so. That gives you a chance to remind them further. But again, yeah, and it's true, they can call folks not listed as a reference. So then put it in the resume. But there, you will, of course, work with your resume folks, letting them know that they'll potentially be contacted, and just, you know, note that they may be getting a call about so-and-so, like your current name versus the name that they knew you by. So that allows you to manage that as well. Other? Yeah.
In terms of putting our address on the resume, if we know that we're applying for jobs out of state and we're going to be moving, whether or not we get the job, is there a way to communicate that? My worry is that an employer would see I live in Wisconsin, I'm not going to hire her.
Yes. That's a great question. So resume, put the current address, like current contact information, and that's the job of the cover letter. So at the final paragraph of the cover letter, it's like a 4-paragraph letter, you're going to note, you know, among other things, that you're, you know, you'd be delighted to have the opportunity to learn more about the organization and its interest in filling this position, and as well, you know, you will be relocating to the area in, you know, X month, X year, and you would be happy to meet. You note in there that you're going to be relocating. So it's I would frankly be inclined to say that more than, if I get this job, I'll come there. You just go ahead and say, I'll be relocating to that, to such and such town, and be delighted to meet in person, then and before if needed. So yeah, you want to foreclose that doubt by just proactively saying, yep, coming there. Yeah. Now, if you're applying to jobs in multiple states because you're casting a wide net, I mean, yes, there's kind of possibly a small world effect where people might know each other and realize you're doing that. Like, wait, where's she? There's a theoretical, risk there, but probably limited. Go ahead and tell them all that you're relocating there and make it work. This is on video. Yeah, no. Okay. Other questions? So work on this this is an iterative kind of thing. So you want to work on it some more, exchange, proofread each other's. If you're using periods in the bullet point listings, every single listing must have a period at the end. Don't skip the periods. 3 to 5 bullet points. I think, well, it's all important. The formatting is important, the formatting consistency, and then nailing those descriptions, really working editorially on having them be extremely descriptive, succinct, and you're gleaning the most important, most meaty stuff that you did. No, you don't. But if you don't, then no periods. If you do, always periods. One or the other. Right? Absolute. Yeah. I mean, honestly, because they don't know how awesome you are yet, this is it. So you have to. It kind of can't have any editorial errors. It's got to be flawless, right? So help each other proofread and Yeah. Okay. Bye, guys. See you next week if you can make it.